Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Rene Fernandez Wash Processed Honduras from Nemesis Coffee. And there's the cup right there. And this is part 5 of our 6-part Vancouver review series. I'm currently out at their Great Northern Way location, so once again, apologies for any sort of background noise, as Great Northern Way is another major street. Now, there's so much to discuss with Nemesis that we must start from the beginning and my first ever trip to their Gastown location, which was many years ago at this point, and I was so impressed by that first trip that I started making trips up to Vancouver every month or every other month just to purchase coffees from that as well as another location, given that they were one of the most impressive multi-roasters I'd been to anywhere in the world. Now, during this time, it was a little bit more difficult to get a lot of the coffee roasters in the United States that they were carrying. So for that reason, I had an opportunity to try so many coffee roasters that I wouldn't have had an opportunity to try otherwise. Now, since the last time I was in Vancouver, they made the decision to start roasting their own coffee, and a lot of me was hoping that they would still maintain their status as a multi-roaster as well. However, they have since gone exclusively with their own coffees, and that's been a little disappointing, but a lot has changed as well. And another thing that has changed is this location, because this location didn't exist the last time I was in Vancouver either. And I've been tracking the progress of this project for a very long time because it's a very interesting looking coffee shop, and we should discuss this coffee shop because the pictures don't necessarily do it justice. This was one of the main reasons I came to Vancouver, was to experience this coffee shop in person, and it is every bit as impressive as the photos have indicated, if not more so. It is big. It is really pretty on the outside, and it is really stunning on the inside as well. I am at a loss for words on how to describe this coffee shop. It kind of looks like something Frank Gehry would have designed. It is one of the most unique and impressive coffee shops I've ever experienced in my entire life. But we're actually here to discuss this coffee, so let's start discussing the way the cafe works. Okay, so the cafe itself has one drip option, and then they allow all of their other coffees as a pour-over. They use a Kalita, and normally I would go with the drip option. However, I wanted to buck that trend given that I'm sure my friend Greg wants a review of this coffee specifically, so I actually went with this Honduran coffee. Their drip offering was a Costa Rica that I was also interested in. I've actually never had any of their coffee. This is my first time trying one of the coffees that they have roasted. They do roast on alluring. It is visible when you are entering the building. So I saw their alluring, and I was very curious to see how this would turn out. But let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee, as it is a Paranima. It is a Honduran coffee. Out of all the coffees I've reviewed in this series up to this point, this is the one that probably sounds the most like my type of coffee to begin with. Now, I was very curious to see what direction that they would go, and I haven't discussed the roast profile yet, and I've been kind of waiting to discuss that because I was wondering if they would go really, really light, and this is really, really light. This is one of the lightest cups of coffee I've had in a while, not just necessarily during this trip, but this coffee is very, very light. That's the roast profile I would go with for it, and that's kind of what I was expecting. The first impression I had of this coffee was, okay, it's not quite as bright as I was expecting, but after it cooled down, the acidity really ramped up in this. This is a very citric coffee. If I could describe this coffee as reminding me of something, it would be some of those old school Say coffees that were very lightly developed. That's kind of the case with this one right here, as the citrus really seems to be on the forefront and dominates the entirety of the cup. That's something you're going to see in the tasting wheel, but other things I did want to highlight, there is a slight bit of this candied sweetness. It's not overly prominent within the cup. It's a lot more subtle. I feel like there's possibly a way to get a lot more out of this, but it really is the citric factor that is most dominant. This coffee really reminded me a lot of lime juice in general. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put up that tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. And again, notes right here. So let's go ahead and look through them because we have a number of level 5s, and we're going to start with the acidity at level 5. That's what I'm discussing right here, is this is a very bright cup of coffee, and that's kind of the expectation I had. Because when a lot of coffee shops, especially already progressive and modern coffee shops to begin with, decide to start roasting their own, I've noticed that they tend to go on the very light side of things. And that's the experience I had with this coffee, at least specifically. It was so light that it definitely scored level 5 in the acidity, especially more so as it had cooled down. Now, other level 5s, the citrus, the other thing I was kind of mentioning, it just tastes like lime juice to me. It's a very strong lime juice, and the bitterness is at a level 4. I'm kind of jumping the gun on that, but it's so high because the bitterness of that citrus is really strong as well that it justifies that citrus being as high as it is. This is, again, a very citric, acidic cup of coffee in general. Other thing, the finish, level 5. Yes, it has that very long-lasting citric finish to it. Again, I've said that it reminds me a lot of some older, say, coffees that have a very citric-forward sort of profile to them. That's what I'm experiencing with this coffee from start to finish. Again, right at first impression, it wasn't necessarily as strong in that citric direction, but the more you let it cool down, the more that really seems to just dominate the rest of the cup. We have a couple of, actually just one level 4 right here, which is the bitterness. Already discussed that. A couple of level 3s, the florality level 3. They do list a floral note on here. Could possibly be the priming effect. I'm not getting anything overly distinct or defined in terms of the florality. I guess I could say that there's a kind of slight citric floral component to it, but that just kind of goes in line with the very strong citrus that's present within this coffee in general. Saltiness, level 3. Yes, again, that's very much in line with the citric aspect of this coffee. Cleanliness, level 3. I know that's one of the biggest and most important things I needed to discuss in this. It's really hard to give a level 4 to a coffee that doesn't have anything in terms of an overly defined profile other than a very strong lime-like aspect to it. There were some other things that they had listed on there. Kiwi was one. I had a very hard time picking out kiwi, but typically I don't have a easy time picking out kiwi in most coffees. So that one I couldn't necessarily see. The florality I couldn't necessarily see. It was basically just that really strongly defined lime aspect present within this coffee. And other than that, just really strong, bright acidity, undefined acidity to an extent. So that's why it's remained there at that level 3. And then we have a bunch of level 2s. I don't think that there's anything else worth discussing in terms of those. With the exception of the body, lighter bodied cup of coffee, something you would probably be expecting given, well, just the experience of this coffee in general. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, I will be completely honest, it's actually what I was expecting, which I don't know if I was necessarily going into this with overly high hopes, because I was really hoping that this wouldn't be the type of coffee that I would get. I was hoping that maybe they would push the development a little further. Maybe you'd get a much more rounded cup of coffee, and maybe you'd get a little bit more sweetness. But up to the moment where I actually arrived in the coffee shop, I didn't even know what roaster that they were using. I didn't know what sort of profile they were going to go with on their coffee. I had very little idea of anything that they were going to be doing with their, I don't know, procedure in general. So you live and learn. It wasn't quite what I was expecting. That's basically the way I'll leave my overall thoughts on this one. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, if you like your really bright cups of coffee, especially in terms of the citric direction, that's kind of the best way I can point you towards in this coffee. I would like to try a couple more of their coffees, and I'm probably going to swing by their Gastown location, not review it, but just try a different one to see if the rest of their coffees do align with this sort of profile, if this was a one-off, because this one was hand brewed, so entirely possible that there was just an error making this coffee, but this is just kind of the impression that I think a lot of their coffees will yield. I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee or anything from Nemesis, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it or them as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Rene Fernandez Wash Processed Honduras from Nemesis Coffee. Thank you for watching.